Okay, let's start. So, hi everyone, and welcome to Niagara Networks webinar. In today's webinar, we'll discuss the risk and consideration of deployed switched port analyzer, known as industry term SPAN. We'll discuss, obviously, the critical impact on security operations. Before we start, I would like to introduce ourselves. My name is Zeev. I'm the VP of Marketing at Niagara Networks. I'm joined by James Hanson, the Global Director of Business Development and Technology Alliance at Niagara Networks. John is a seasoned speaker and he will present the topic today. Definitely enjoy the discussion here. We will also have a Q&A session to highlight specific themes that will be most relevant to your organization. In terms of the webinar flow, feel free to post questions if you have any in the chat area, and we definitely will answer them at the end of this session. All right, so Jim, please introduce yourself and go ahead.
All right, well, thank you for the introduction, Zev. Good afternoon and welcome everyone that's joining us here live today, and also want to welcome those that will probably be watching this at more of convenient time. As Zev mentioned, my name is Jim Hanson, and I am the Director of Business Development at Niagara Networks. And in that position, I work closely with many of the industry's leading NDR, XDR, UCTM, Unified Communication Threat Management vendors, to ensure that their tools have access to the packet data required to protect against today's sophisticated attacks. Now, prior to joining Niagara Networks, I was a security engineer for 30 plus years for some of the leading NDR, APM, NPM, and packet broker companies out there. So I have personally seen some of the risks that improper use of SPAN can present in today's modern infrastructure. So in our webinar today, we're going to discuss, why SPANs are potentially a security risk, as well as try to understand how a switch feature intended for a network analyst to connect directly to a switch to take packet traces has kind of evolved to really become the foundation for today's advanced threat detection and response tools are deployed. So whether it was cost, convenience, or I believe many are just following the status quo and really do not fully understand that risk that's associated with using SPANs as that foundation. You will hear me repeat this several times in today's webinar that packet visibility is the foundation of your security posture. Let's think about that for a moment. If you go to build any structure, what is the first thing you must do? You have to lay the foundation. And that requires a survey, a soil test, a separate inspection and certification process before you can ever even begin to build. So why is your security infrastructure treated differently? If you recall the cautionary tale of the big bad wolf and the three little pigs, only 1 out of 3 recognize the importance of a strong foundation. Now, I know using that as it relates to today's reliance on SPAN ports may seem to kind of trivialize it a little bit, but as a cautionary tale, it does kind of illustrate the point that I'm wanting to make here today. And then finally, we're going to look at what are the best options to mitigate that risk of SPAN ports, as well as examine a case study that's going to highlight the benefit of ensuring that your tools get access to the right traffic in the right way to protect your reputation and your customers' data.
Go ahead,
The
Jim.
threat landscape. Did you have something, Zev?
No. Go ahead.
Okay, sorry. So the threat landscape and attack vectors, they continue to evolve and they demand greater and greater sophistication to maintain a vigilant security posture. What was once able to be handled by maybe a next generation firewall, a packet capture tool, and or a basic SIM are just not capable of addressing the advanced and persistent threats of today. So security solutions need visibility at all the OSI layers, and full packet visibility is a must-have in order to address the security threats that we're facing today. SIEMs and other security tools that rely heavily on log collection, correlation of those logs, and analysis is just not going to be able to get the job done in today's threat landscape. You're going to need tools that can see packet level data, and that must come from a network layer device, with SPAN being the one that's most widely available and widely used. As a sales engineer for security vendors for the past 30 years, I've made a pretty good living at selling to customers after the breach. There's always a lot less resistance during those calls, but unfortunately, that comes at the expense of someone else's pain. And I have never really saw that as a success. Helping the customers prevent that from happening is always our primary goal. Now, I do not mean to make light of any company's misfortune, but budget cuts, resource constraints, or going with what is considered status quo are just not conducive to ensuring that you stay out of the headlines. Always keep in mind that if your tool didn't see it, it still happened.
By the way, what I would like to do is actually launch a poll for the audience. If the audience can click on the two questions, it's pretty much easy. I would like to see some initial information about the audience. And can you see, by the way, the poll? Okay, I see. Okay, so basically we have 33% using SPAN. Okay, so the two questions are, do you use SPAN ports in your network? Looks like yes, it's just moving up right now. So we have 60% saying yes and 40% no. And regarding, have you ever had a security incident involving a SPAN port? No. Okay, that's interesting.
And either good to know or we don't know yet. So
exactly.
that's good though. But 60%, I think that is not actually surprising to me. So
good.
Okay. So, SPAN ports have been part of switch technology almost as long as the switch. However, somewhere along the way, the SPAN port has evolved well beyond what the original intent was. Wikipedia defines a SPAN use as network engineers or administrators use port mirroring to analyze and debug data or diagnose errors on a network. There's no mention of security. Why? Because it was never meant for that purpose. SPAN capabilities vary by vendor and different models within the same vendor. Packet loss is an inevitability with spans. Let's assume we have a 24 port 10 gig switch and we want to span all the traffic to a single 10 gig span port. I do not need to go into detail here for you to understand what's going to happen. You can try to limit to just receive traffic or limit to just transmit traffic. You can also try to filter by selecting specific VLANs or TCP application ports, but you are sacrificing the visibility to your tool when you're implementing that filtering. Spans require attention and monitoring to prevent loss and ensure you have the complete data path. I have seen on more than one occasion where, because of the number of VLAN limitation within a span, half the VLANs were spanned on one switch, and then the other half were spanned on another switch. And hopefully they were within the same data path. So as you can start to see, not only are spans limited by physical or technological capabilities, but the opportunity for misconfiguration looms large. And as I will mention later, spans are rarely under the same change control as a router or firewall. And this is the lifeblood of your security infrastructure. So span can be ideal for a POC or an ad hoc case where taps are just not feasible, but it should never be the primary means for packet acquisition.
Yeah, maybe one point that given the fact that we had this poll and the results, the fact that it didn't happen to me, it doesn't matter if it's the case yesterday, but you cannot really take the white paper and say it will not gonna happen to me in any case. What I'm trying to say here, if we're looking on sophisticated attacks, really sophisticated attacks that organized very I would say very clearly that targeting the networking infrastructure, switches, and denial of service attacks on switches can create a nightmare that usually the networking team not necessarily will have exactly the correlation to the security operation team. And again, just to name a few of those attacks, ARP spoofing attack, which is known. Again, obviously you can configure the switches to protect themselves, but I've faced in several incidents cases that people didn't configure the switches correctly. And then you have the broadcast and multicast storm attack, CDP points injection. And again, any of those misconfiguration, like even default VLAN that's used for management. So when we look at all of those issues, it's putting the span as a core of the monitoring factors is really tangible. And I think this is really the correlation of the data that we would like to convey for the upcoming slides. Okay, so go ahead, Jim.
Yeah, great point, Seth. So earlier I asked the question, why spans, given all the downside, are still experiencing widespread use in today's networks and especially in a security play? And the answer is, today's networks are so complex and require multiple approaches to really try to achieve that full visibility. Private and public cloud deployments tend to rely on port mirroring capabilities as part of either a vSwitch, your virtual distributed switch, or VPC mirroring. And while not ideal, sometimes there is no other option. But even with VDS port mirroring, AWS VPC mirroring, customers are still faced with the problem of too much traffic. Virtual taps as part of a private and public cloud deployments, have many of the same benefits as physical taps while eliminating many of the drawbacks of traditional span. However, none of those solutions provide a way to aggregate, filter, and intelligently control this traffic so that now we have to address the possibility of not only oversubscribing our span port, but now we can have the propensity to oversubscribe our tool, or even more undesirable, having to spend money on solutions because you are chasing total bandwidth and not just the relevant traffic. And what I mean by that is if you can't filter it, you have to send everything. So again, you're matching your interface on your tool to the interface on your network and that amount of traffic. By being able to intelligently filter and control that traffic, it gives you greater flexibility and options. So visibility is, already complex with just needing to see the north-south traffic and some internal traffic. But now we must monitor, not only the internal virtual infrastructure, now we've got our cloud deployments. And with each of the three major players having basic mirroring capabilities to none at all, that challenge gets even more complex. So now that we have a better understanding of some of the complexity and challenges we are facing, let's begin to look at how we should begin or start addressing those. So there may be some on the call today that may be new to the concept of network packet brokering, packet data visibility, and some of the other concepts we are discussing today. So I just wanted to take a moment to explain this by looking at kind of a traditional deployment with one of our NDR partners. So over on the left in step one, where the network is, this is where the packet acquisition happens, whether it's physical tap, virtual tap, or span. But the very foundation of security starts here. And then in step 2, we need to aggregate all that traffic. So you can imagine whether you have 10 spans or 10 taps, you don't have that many ports on your tools, or you're going to be spending a large amount of money on tools. So we need to aggregate that traffic into the platform. And then once we have that all aggregated, it's obviously going to be more traffic than any one device is able to consume. So we need to be able to create filters that deliver the right traffic in the right way to the tool that's going to best ensure their ability to detect and respond to a threat. And then finally, in step 4, we kind of take it beyond that and we start allowing for greater control and enrichment of that data before sending to the tool. And this has the benefit of increasing the tool's fidelity, helping it determine alerts quicker, and more importantly, reducing alert fatigue for the SOC team. Complacency to alerts that we see all the time is one of the biggest holes in security. Is just those constant alerts that never get responded to or complacently starts to sit in. So some of these enrichment features can be packet deduplication. This is a very prevalent problem with the use of spans, which can affect the actual fidelity of your analysis from your tool. Packet slicing can be used to save storage, or TLS decryption can be used when you actually need to see traffic in the clear. And end-to-end encryption is becoming more and more prevalent, especially in financial institutions. So sometimes there needs to be a need to actually break in and do DPI on encrypted traffic, which goes beyond what traditional JA3 fingerprinting that most vendors are using today. This gives the ability to do that DPI on the encrypted traffic. So a lot of functionality. Again, where we're focusing on today is that step 1, what are you using for packet acquisition? Tap versus span, virtual tap, that is where it begins. And then, of course, the aggregation and intelligent filtering are the benefits of including a visibility controller such as Niagara Networks or one of the other packet brokers out there. So now let's just take a moment to take a step back from the whole span versus tap discussion and, quickly see that having that visibility to all the traffic is going to require, sorry, folks, it's going to require that you have full control over every packet in the network and how you make it available to the tools that monitor and protect your network. So this carries over into the cost analysis, planning, etc. No longer do you need to buy tools for the network, whether it's 10 gig, 25 gig, 100 gig, or 400. You buy what is needed for the traffic. So when you control the traffic, it allows you to start controlling the cost. And this is one of the big benefits of creating this visibility strategy. It's not all about just making sure you see every packet, which is absolutely critical. But now you start to have flexibility and control over the data. And when you're in control of that traffic and those packets, you can make a lot of decisions that you would not be able to with just a traditional span type deployment or even a basic tap deployment. But all of those benefits and all of that stuff is kind of more of an in-depth topic for maybe another webinar to talk more about the features and benefits of a visibility controller. But I want to make sure I do stay on track for the topic that we have today, which is obviously the risk that spans may introduce. So today's tools require packet acquisition in order to threat hunt, but relying on span ports, which have, as we have seen, can be highly susceptible to oversubscription, port contention, and misconfiguration. And these can result in your security platform just not able to support your security tools. Now, Taps create an exact copy of the bidirectional network traffic at full line rate. Keep in mind that a 10 gig full duplex link is actually 20 gig. It's full duplex send and receive, so the total aggregate amount of any network, 10 gig can actually be 20 gig. So when you start trying to monitor anything that's non-client server traffic, things can escalate really quickly as far as oversubscription. So taps should be used wherever 100% visibility and traffic fidelity is required. And if you ask me, that's every security deployment that you do. Anytime traffic volumes are going to be moderate to high, you need to think about deploying taps from the beginning. So taps don't care what protocol is carried in the traffic, whether it's IPv4, IPv6, all traffic is passed through the passive tap, including packets with errors that may be important that spans will not be able to pass. So when possible, install taps early in your design phase. And I've worked with many customers that were refreshing data centers to go ahead and implement a tap first type of mentality. And go ahead and start passing that traffic directly to either a Niagara visibility controller or packet broker. And if you're already, needing those, you can always just have the taps there and bring those in at any particular time to be able to monitor and aggregate that data. So, and if you already have a packet broker solution implemented in your network and you are feeding your packet broker with spans, I'm going to say it's like putting retreads on your Lamborghini. It's pretty cool driving around the cul-de-sac, but I wouldn't recommend it on the interstate. So if you've already made that investment in that type of platform, really, really evaluate and consider adding taps as the mechanism for feeding that packet broker solution. And then, when we talk about taps, we want to tap everything, as I said, even if it's not yet required. If you have the opportunity, the links, the data path, go ahead and start tapping that. That traffic will be available for either ad hoc troubleshooting or doing security inspection within seconds and without ever needing to involve change management again. So, why the heavy reliance on span ports? Everything we've talked about just kind of seems so negative. So why the heavy reliance? Well, A, they're free. B, they're convenient. And I really think when we start talking about taps, there's just a propensity that there is a fear of having a network outage. Now, passive taps are pretty much fail-safe. Unless you pull the cable or beat it with a hammer, it's going to work. I personally think that a lot of the perception of taps really goes back to the days of copper. And yes, copper taps were challenging and could cause problems with auto negotiation during failover, but short of maybe manufacturing and OT, no one is really using 10 or 100 base T. So we're pretty much talking always passive taps these days. And today's passive optical taps are nothing more than optics that split light. And this is known as the light budget. And it is the primary consideration to installing taps along with the media type. Single mode fiber, multi-mode fiber, bi-die. But light budget is referring to the amount of light that a tap will make available for the tool, and it's going to be influenced by distance, attenuation, and optic quality. And along with the split ratios, they have to be considered in any fiber deployment, not just taps. And you'll hear passive taps are 80-20 split, 70-30 split, 60-40. So remember, it's 80% of light for the network path, 20% siphoned off for the tool, and 30 and 20 and so forth and so on. So with those passive taps, once you install them and once they're lit up, they are pretty much set and forget. And over my career, I've installed hundreds of taps, and I don't think I've ever seen one fail on its own unless something has been introduced into the network that either affects the distance or attenuation. And quite frankly, this will not only affect the tap, but it's more than likely going to affect the networking gear as well. So taps are the best choice to protect your company, and the risk is far lower than that of spans. When a tap fails, you know it immediately. When a span is misconfigured, you only know about it when you get the ransom note. And this kind of goes back to the very beginning of this topic. Are you using spans? Yes. Have you ever had a security breach? No. Do you know? Because I have seen on more than one occasion, because spans are not under the same change control as traditional firewalls and routers, that if you've already defined your 30 VLANs on a catalyst switch, or 30 or 45, can't remember, but and somebody needs a VLAN that's not there, and they simply change and add the VLAN that they have and don't go back and change it, all of a sudden your tool is blind to that VLAN, and there's going to be a breach or something, and everybody's going to be pointing the finger. Why did my tool not see it? It's because your span got misconfigured, and this happens a lot. Impossible to happen with a tap. There's no configuration. It's just purely light optics and passing that traffic to the tool. So, okay, enough with the doom and gloom. So let's see how we solve this problem and put this together in action. And I am going to use a case study that involved a healthcare provider. And this was working with one of our partners, ExtraHop, who I'm sure you know is one of the leading IDS and NDR vendors. But the customer, they already had an EDR or endpoint solution in place, but it was blind to the recently added OT devices. We needed to start monitoring and protecting our CAT scanners and MRI devices, but you can't deploy agents. So now the tools that were protecting the network became blind to that. And of course, to further add additional complexity was their migration to an AWS cloud strategy. So the end solution was to incorporate ExtraHop's RevealX 360 platform along with Niagara Network's visibility controller, and combined with both physical and virtual taps. We had actually investigated the AWS VPC mirroring, but just kind of had some reservations from the amount of traffic and not being able to filter that. And if you've investigated, you'll know that VPC mirroring is also not free, like the ones you get on your on-prem switches. So by implementing both the virtual tapping, the physical tapping, and the visibility controller, along with ExtraHop's NDR solution, we were able to eliminate the blind spots, ensure full visibility of all the network traffic to ExtraHop, whether it was the north-south, east and west of the private cloud, or the AWS VPC traffic. And this allowed ExtraHop to identify the MAC IP addresses of those OT devices and provide that back to the EDR solution so that those devices, if compromised, could be isolated or disabled. So this, combined with ExtraHop's IDS and EDA appliances, ability to detect and respond to any threat anywhere in the network, ensures that this customer was protected from both known as well as the zero-day threats that are persistent for all of us. So with that said, and kind of wrapping up, one of the things I really highly recommend, and that's to engage with Niagara Network's professional services to evaluate your current security platform. Even if you already have another packet broker, leverage our expertise, leverage our ability to understand, that security platform and the importance of packet acquisition, and let us provide you with a detailed analysis of the potential risks, provide you with a recommended architecture, as well as a cost analysis of what it would be to move from span to tap. So again, let our expertise help you avoid a potential security risk and protect your brand. So with that said, I again want to thank everybody for taking the time. I apologize for running a little bit over, but I'm going to hand it back to Zev and
Yeah,
see if
no,
we have some questions.
we're actually right on time, and we have two questions from the audience. One is, can you please explain how the deployment is done in the leaf and spine network? I think maybe you can go back to the previous slides.
Right. Right. So that is a great question, and we actually have a specific solution brief for the Cisco ACI. And in that environment, we are really we are leveraging physical taps between the leaf and the spine within the Cisco ACI architecture. If we can identify it, we can certainly make sure we provide you with a detailed solution brief on that deployment architecture as well.
Okay, basically, maybe to add on top of it, in leaf spine is a massive network usually. So eventually, spine switches, which are the core switches, something that, or at least in a nutshell, if you're having the core spine environment and tap the traffic there, eventually you get most of the essential area, again, from this perspective of covering the traffic. But obviously, if we're looking at the diagram here, it's just an abstract. So it's not like one tab that will, it means that you will need really to invest configuration time to set up, again, those out-of-band tabs, which are in parallel to those interfaces on the spine switches. But again, as you mentioned, maybe the visual here was a bit of abstract, so it was not that clear that only one tap is really connected here. So
yeah, that's a good point. If you look at that, that would be 30, 40 taps. So every link's got to be tapped. Every part of the data path that a packet can traverse must be tapped, or you're going to risk the loss of visibility. So in a Cisco ACI, we're not going to say it's not complex. It's not going to take some effort. But that effort to gain that full visibility in that architecture is definitely the gold standard or the prize you would want to achieve. Unfortunately, it does get a little bit complex.
Yeah, we have another question. What about virtual versus physical?
So in virtual, and I'll use a typical VMware instance, for example. So typically with a virtual tap, what we're doing there is introducing per hypervisor or per server, per physical server, we're going to have one virtual tap for each physical server. And that will be able to tap into any of the hypervisors on that. Now, the advantage of doing that, so when we actually are doing the virtual tap in, say, a VMware environment, we are actually leveraging either the vSwitch promiscuous mode or the virtual distributed switch port mirroring. And so, well, yes, I can turn on port mirroring at any time. Yes, you can. But when you turn on the port mirroring on a VDS and you have 100 or 200 VMs attached to it, you're never going to be able to push that data out of the VM environment into a tool that may be either physical or even if it was virtual, it's just too much traffic. So the big advantage of the virtual tap in a VM environment is you're going to get that benefit of being able to control and filter that traffic. But a virtual tap in that environment is basically a software-only tap, software-only deployment. And I hope that addressed the question.
Okay, we have another question. What about cloud providers? Can we use it with NSX-T?
I'm not sure if I know that enough to have an answer. I would like to, if you know it, Zeb, please, but I'd like to maybe take that as a takeaway.
Again, in terms of cloud providers, if they have, the virtual tab can be installed based on a different hypervisor, not only the VMware we have in our specification datasheet, the different type of hypervisor, which include also the big cloud guys, not necessarily all of them, but at least the bulk, the vast majority of them. So that's for this specific question. If it's possible, what about those cloud providers? Yes, you can. Usually, as you mentioned previously, in cloud providers, they have their own tools, so like mirroring. But if you want to replicate typically your on-prem IT environment, and I think this is the keyword. This is the keyword here on the cases that really will be applicable. Usually the IT team would like to replicate almost the same tools, or at least more sustained tools that they're already using, which drives this kind of across on-prem and cloud environment if you can use the same tool also on the cloud instances. So that's pretty much addressing this is something that really creates the comfort zone. So hopefully also we answer it correctly here. But maybe just to mention one small kind of detail here in terms of the virtual tab. Obviously, the virtual tab is for up to 10 gigabit processing, which is supposed to be sufficient in most of those virtual environments, because most of those virtual switches are not running more than that. Okay.
Yep, great. So yes, definitely the VTAPs are available for Google, Azure, as well as AWS. Of course, AWS and Google do tend to have their own type of mirroring solution. It's not free. Azure is still kind of out there, so the virtual taps become almost mandatory in Azure. But again,
and by the way,
combination of filtering really helps.
There was a small comment here also that pretty much the best place will be to, in terms of deployment, will be at the edge of the network. Well, the demarcation point on any network, typically the on-prem or cloud environment, the edge of the network, the termination point, the entering and termination point, is pretty much the optimum place, obviously, because then you really see the traffic. You can start debugging, or even in terms of compliance, this is the place that you would like to capture everything, including errors. If you have even MTU, which is frame oversize, jumbo frames, anything that will be corrupted frames, so that running in the network, I totally agree, which means the edge of the network will be the classical place. In leaf and spine, it's a bit different because it's already creating some different type of, and you can see the spaghetti here on this chart that shows the complexity. But I think again that's a good point. Edge of the network, termination point is classical.
And I do want to add to that. Well, I 100% agree. The deeper you go in the network, the more complex and the more taps you're gonna need. You're always looking to find that choke point. But bear in mind, if you miss something, you need to be able to find lateral movement within your organization. So think about not only the edge, but if something got through, will you be able to see lateral movement internally?
I can also add on top of it, more sophisticated security operation teams typically place honeypots in some cases. And, when you have those honeypots, obviously you can capture the traffic, but again, think about what we discussed previously. The tap is an out of band tool, which means this is the tool that even if you will have a crash in your network or something will happen, this tool is totally isolated. It's kind of from the United Nations. It's sitting there and capturing the traffic, any traffic. So, given the fact that this is the case, the tab absolutely gives the comfort zone of all the best of worlds in terms of deployment. I think that's pretty much the summary of what we're trying to convey here. All right, looks like we're already crossing the comfort time zone. I think anything else? I don't see any other questions, so I think we're good here.
I think I see the last one was about the edge. I think we addressed that.
Yeah, so good. So, again, thank you for attending our webinar. For those, again, who were unable to attend this live session, we'll distribute the recording after this call. So you'll get an email right after this webinar. And good, I think we're all set. We can close the webinar. Thank you all. All right.
Yes, thanks everyone for taking the time. I hope you found it informative, and I appreciate everybody's attention.
All right. Thank you.